Then he smiled. It was not a large smile. It was the kind of smile that seemed to say, "You made it." For some reason, that small expression stayed with me. I lowered my window. "Are you Caleb Mercer?" His voice was calm. "Yes." He stepped closer and checked something on a small clipboard. "You are expected." There was something about the way he said it that made me laugh softly. "I hope that's a good thing." He looked at me for a second. "It depends on why you came." I thought he was joking. Later, I would understand that he wasn't. His name was Dorian Hayes. He was American too, although his life had taken him far away from the place where I had grown up. He had been working at the estate for several months, mostly handling security during the night. At first, I thought that was all he was. A watchman. Someone standing beside a gate. Someone whose job was to notice people coming and going. I had no idea how important he would become to me. Dorian opened the gate and directed me toward the main house. Before I drove away, he leaned slightly toward the window. "Your room is in the east wing." "Thank you." He nodded. Then he added, "If you need anything, come to the gate." I smiled. "I might." "You probably will." I laughed again. For the first time that day, I felt a little lighter. That night I could not sleep. The room was comfortable but unfamiliar. Outside, insects sang in the darkness, and somewhere beyond the walls, I could hear distant voices. I stared at the ceiling for a long time. Then I heard a soft knock. When I opened the door, nobody was there. Only a small bottle of water sat on the floor. I looked down the hallway. At first, I thought someone from the staff had left it. But then I noticed a small folded piece of paper beneath the bottle. "The nights can feel strange here. Drink some water and rest." There was no name. I knew who had written it. The next evening, I walked to the gate. Dorian was sitting outside the guardhouse, reading beneath the yellow light. When he saw me, he closed the book. "You came." "I told you I might." He smiled. "I remember." I sat in the empty chair beside him. For several minutes, neither of us spoke. The silence was surprisingly comfortable. Eventually, Dorian asked, "Do you like the estate?" "I haven't decided. Give it time." "I usually don't have much patience." I noticed. I looked at him. He smiled again. "You talk like you've known me for years. Sometimes people tell you things without realizing it." His words stayed with me. That evening became the beginning of a strange routine. Every night, after dinner, I walked toward the gate. Sometimes we talked for an hour. Sometimes we barely spoke. I told him about America, my work, my family, and the things I had lost without knowing how to replace them. Dorian rarely interrupted. He simply listened. That was something I had forgotten people could do. Most people waited for their turn to speak. Dorian seemed willing to hear the silence between my words. One night, I finally asked about him. "What brought you here?" He looked beyond the gate. "Maybe I needed somewhere quiet." "From what?" He lowered his eyes. "From myself." I did not ask another question. I understood that answer better than I wanted to admit. A few nights later, heavy rain arrived without warning. The sky darkened quickly, and the wind pushed rain across the estate. I ran toward the guardhouse. Dorian moved aside so I could stand beneath the narrow roof. "You could have stayed inside," he said. "I wanted to check on you." His expression softened. "You came all this way to check on me?" "I suppose I did." For a moment, neither of us moved. Rain struck the ground around us. I became strangely aware of how close we were standing. Dorian looked at me, then quietly looked away. I felt something shift inside me, frighten me. Not because it felt wrong, because it felt real. I told myself it was friendship. It had to be. That explanation was easier. Before I left, Dorian suddenly became serious. "Caleb." "Yes." "Don't walk around the estate after midnight." "Why?" He looked toward the dark trees. "Just don't." "You're making it sound dangerous." "It can be." "What happens after midnight?" He paused. Then he looked directly at me. Some stories are safer when they stay buried. I wanted to ask what he meant. Instead, I nodded. The following afternoon, I found an old photograph near the gate. It showed Dorian standing beside another man. The photograph was faded, but the other man's face was clear enough to recognize. My heart stopped. It was Marcus Reed. Marcus was an old friend and business connection from America. I had not expected to see his face there. When Dorian noticed the photograph in my hand, his expression changed. The warmth disappeared from his eyes. "Where did you find that?" "Near the gate." He slowly reached for it. I did not give it to him. "Why are you standing with Marcus?" Dorian looked toward the road. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he whispered, "Because some things are harder to explain than they are to survive." I felt a coldness settle inside me. Until that moment, Dorian had been the one person at the estate who made me feel safe. Now I realized something else. The man guarding the gate was also guarding a secret. And somehow, I had just stepped into the middle of it. After finding that photograph, I tried to stay away from the gate. I told myself I was only giving Dorian space. The truth was harder to admit. I was afraid of what I might discover. For 3 evenings, I remained inside the main house after dinner. I read books I could barely remember, answered messages from America, and pretended to be busy. But every night, I found myself looking toward the window. The yellow light beside the gate was always visible in the distance. And somewhere beneath that light was Dorian. I missed him. That realization embarrassed me. We had known each other for only a short time, yet his absence had already changed the shape of my evenings. On the 4th night, I finally walked back. Dorian was sitting outside the guardhouse. He looked up when he heard my footsteps. Neither of us smiled. "You stopped coming," he said. "I thought you wanted me to." "I never said that." I sat beside him. The silence between us felt different now. There was something unfinished hanging between our shoulders. Finally, I placed the photograph on the table. "Tell me about Marcus." Dorian stared at it. I knew this question would come. "That isn't an answer." "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." I waited. He folded his hands together. "Marcus and I worked together years ago." "Doing what?" "Something that went badly." "That sounds vague." "It is vague because the truth isn't simple." I felt frustration rising inside me. "You could just tell me." Dorian looked at me. "I could. But once you know something about me, you cannot unknow it." I studied his face. There was sadness there, not guilt. At least I did not think it was guilt. It looked more like fear. That night, he still refused to explain everything. But he talked about other things. He told me about growing up in a family where people rarely said what they felt. He described a father who believed silence was strength and a mother who tried to keep peace between everyone. I listened. Then I told him about my own family, about the years I had spent trying to become the person everyone expected, about the relationships I had ruined because I was afraid of needing someone. Dorian did not judge me. He simply said, "Needing someone doesn't make you weak." I looked at him. "Then why does it feel dangerous?" "Because the person you need can become the person who hurts you most." His answer stayed with me. Our friendship changed after that night. We became closer without making any agreement to do so. Dorian remembered small things. He knew when I had skipped dinner. He knew when I was worried. He knew that I liked sitting outside during rainstorms. Once, he left my favorite drink on the table beside the guardhouse. "You remembered. You mentioned it once. I didn't think you were listening." "I listen more than you think." I smiled. Something warm moved through me. It was becoming impossible to pretend that Dorian was simply another friend. I began noticing everything. The way his voice softened when he said my name. The way he looked at me before looking away. The way silence seemed to become meaningful whenever we sat together. Still, neither of us crossed the invisible line between friendship and something more. Perhaps we were both afraid. Then Marcus arrived. His car entered the estate one afternoon without warning. When I saw him step out, my stomach tightened. "Caleb!" He hugged me like nothing had changed. You look different. So do you. Marcus laughed. Then his eyes moved toward the gate. Dorian was standing there. The smile disappeared from Marcus's face. It lasted only a second. But I noticed. Dorian noticed too. That evening, Marcus found me alone. You should be careful around him. Dorian. Yes. Why? Marcus lowered his voice. You don't know what kind of man he is. I felt my patience disappear. Then tell me. Marcus looked toward the hallway. He betrayed someone who trusted him. Who? That isn't important. It sounds important. Marcus sighed. I am trying to protect you. His words sounded familiar. Too familiar. Dorian had said something similar. For the first time, I wondered whether both men were trying to protect me from something different. Later that night, I confronted Dorian. Marcus says you betrayed someone. Dorian closed his eyes briefly. He told you that? Yes. What else did he say? That I shouldn't trust you. Dorian looked hurt. Not angry. That somehow made it worse. Do you believe him? I hesitated. I don't know. He nodded slowly. That answer hurts more than you think. I immediately regretted my words. Then tell me the truth. I will. When? When I know you are ready to hear it. I stepped closer. You don't get to decide what I can handle. His eyes met mine. You're right. For several seconds, we stood there without speaking. Then Dorian whispered, I have never wanted to hurt you. Something inside me softened. I wanted to believe him. More than that, I wanted him to keep looking at me that way. That night, we sat outside beneath a clear sky. The estate was quiet. Dorian looked toward the stars. Have you ever cared about someone so much that you became afraid of losing them? Yes, I said. He turned toward me. I think that's what happened to me. My heart began beating faster. He seemed ready to say something else. Instead, he looked away. You deserve someone who never makes you question your worth. I swallowed. Maybe I already found that person. His eyes returned to mine. For one long moment, neither of us moved. Then footsteps sounded behind us. A small envelope had been pushed beneath the gate. My name was written across it. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was one sentence. Ask Marcus why the Watchman was hired. I looked at Dorian. He had gone completely still. And suddenly, I understood that whatever had brought us together was far more complicated than either of us had admitted. Caleb, he stared at me. For the first time, I saw anger beneath his calm expression. I walked away before he could answer. That afternoon, I went through some old estate records. I found Dorian's name several times. His official position was listed as security. But the dates did not make sense. He had arrived shortly after a financial dispute involving the estate. There were missing pages. Several documents had been removed. One name appeared repeatedly. Marcus. My hands became cold. I knew I needed to speak to Dorian. I found him near the gate before sunset. He looked at me and immediately understood that something had changed. You found something. Yes. He lowered his eyes. What did you find? Your employment records. He said nothing. You weren't hired simply as a watchman, were you? Dorian took a slow breath. No. Then why? He looked toward the road. Because I knew something was wrong here. What? Money was disappearing. I stared at him. Dorian explained that years earlier, he had worked with people connected to the estate. He had discovered transactions that did not make sense. Money had been moved through different accounts. People who asked questions were pushed away. Someone had eventually tried to make Dorian responsible. You were blamed. Yes. By Marcus. Dorian nodded. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. Of Marcus. Of losing you. The answer struck me harder than I expected. You could have trusted me. I wanted to. His voice became quieter. But I had spent years watching people disappear from my life whenever they learned too much. I looked away. I wanted to stay angry. It would have been easier. But there was something painful in his voice that I could not ignore. Then he said the words I had been afraid to hear. "I care about you, Caleb." I looked at him. "I care about you more than I should." My chest tightened. Dorian continued. "I tried to keep it hidden because I knew your life was already complicated." I could barely speak. "I care about you too." For the first time, neither of us looked away. There was no dramatic kiss. No sudden promise. Only two people standing beneath a fading sky, finally admitting something that had been growing quietly between them. Then Marcus appeared. His face was pale. "Caleb," he said. Dorian stepped back. Marcus looked at him. "You told him?" Dorian shook his head. "No. He found the truth himself." Marcus looked at me. "You don't understand what you're getting involved in." "I understand enough." "No, you don't." His voice was sharper now. "You think Dorian protected you, but you don't know what he did." Dorian's expression hardened. "Tell him everything." Marcus became silent. I looked between them. "Tell me." Marcus finally admitted that he had manipulated the story years earlier. He had allowed Dorian to take the blame for missing funds because exposing the real situation would have damaged his own reputation. But that was not the worst part. Marcus had arranged for Dorian to remain at the estate under the role of Watchman. He wanted Dorian watched. He wanted to know what Dorian was doing. And when I arrived, Marcus saw an opportunity. He began telling me that Dorian was dangerous. He had hoped I would distrust him. "You used me," I whispered. Marcus looked ashamed. "I thought I was protecting myself." "No." I shook my head. "You were protecting your secret." Marcus did not answer. I turned toward Dorian. But suddenly, another thought entered my mind. "You knew Marcus was doing this." Dorian nodded. "Some of it. And you still kept things from me." "I was trying to protect you." I felt betrayed all over again. "You don't get to decide what truth I deserve." Dorian looked devastated. "I know." His voice was barely audible. "I was afraid." "So was I." I stepped away. For the first time since arriving at the estate, I wanted to be completely alone. I walked toward the house. Behind me, Dorian did not follow. That hurt more than I expected. Later that night, I found another envelope beneath my door. Inside was a copy of an old document. At the bottom was Dorian's signature. Beside it was a handwritten note. He took the blame so someone else could walk away safely. I read it twice. Then I remembered everything Dorian had said. His fear. His silence. His warnings. His strange sadness whenever Marcus's name appeared. Suddenly, I understood something painful. Dorian had not betrayed me. He had betrayed himself by believing silence could protect the people he loved. And Marcus had used that silence against him. I ran toward the gate. The yellow light was still burning. But Dorian was gone. His chair was empty. His book was still resting on the table. I picked it up. Inside the cover was a small handwritten sentence. "Some people leave before they can be left." I stood there alone, holding the book against my chest. For the first time, I understood how much Dorian had become part of my life. And for the first time, I was terrified that I had already lost him. The gate looked different without Dorian. For weeks, that small place had been part of my daily life. The yellow light, the wooden chair, the old guardhouse, and the dusty road beyond it had become familiar. Now everything felt empty. I stood there before sunrise, holding Dorian's book against my chest. I kept thinking about the last words I had said to him. "You don't get to decide what truth I deserve." They were true. But truth did not make the words hurt less. I had wanted honesty from Dorian. Yet when he finally gave me part of it, I had walked away. Maybe that was my own fear speaking. I had spent years believing that people eventually left. When someone became important, I prepared myself for losing them. Dorian had somehow slipped past that defense. That frightened me. I returned to the house and found Amara waiting near the kitchen. She looked at me for a long moment. Where did he go? Because he thinks leaving is kinder than staying. Her words broke something inside me. Did Marcus tell you everything? No. She looked toward the gate. But I knew Dorian before you arrived. I listened carefully. Amara explained that Dorian had once tried to expose what was happening with the estate's money. He had collected records. He had asked questions. He had tried to protect people who could not protect themselves. Then the accusations began. Someone needed a person to blame. Dorian became that person. He could have defended himself, I said. He tried. Then why didn't anyone believe him? Because powerful people do not always need the truth. She paused. They only need people to doubt it. I closed my eyes. Marcus had done exactly that. He had not needed to prove Dorian was guilty. He only needed to make me uncertain. And I had helped him. Where is Dorian now? Amara looked at me. He planned to leave tonight. My heart sank. Tonight? She nodded. He has somewhere to go. I stood immediately. Where? Amara gave me an address. I thanked her and left. The journey felt longer than it should have. My thoughts moved faster than the road beneath me. I remembered Dorian's first smile, the bottle of water outside my room, his favorite silence, the nights beneath the yellow light, the way he had looked at me when he finally admitted that he cared. I had mistaken his fear for deception. By the time I reached the small guest house, evening had already arrived. Dorian was standing beside an old travel bag. When he saw me, he froze. Caleb. I stopped several steps away. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then I said, You were going to leave? Yes. Without saying goodbye? He looked down. I thought it would be easier. For who? He did not answer. I walked closer. You should have trusted me. I know. You should have told me the truth. I know. And I should have listened before judging you. Dorian looked up. You had every right to be angry. Maybe. I took a breath. But I was wrong about one thing. His eyes searched mine. I thought you were trying to control what I knew. I was afraid of what would happen if you knew. That isn't the same thing. No. He looked away. I've spent years believing that if people knew everything about me, they would leave. I felt tears forming in my eyes. I almost did. He nodded. I know. But I'm still here. Dorian's face changed. For the first time, I saw hope in his eyes. Not certainty. Just hope. I don't know what happens next, I said. Neither do I. I can't pretend nothing happened. I don't want you to. I need time. You can have it. And I need you to stop protecting me with silence. He nodded. I will. The room became quiet. Then I finally said what I had been afraid to say. You became important to me. Dorian's breathing changed. I know. No, I don't think you do. I stepped closer. You became the person I looked for every evening. He lowered his eyes. You became the person I trusted with the parts of myself I usually hide. His eyes became wet. And somewhere along the way, I continued, I stopped thinking of you as only my friend. Dorian looked at me. I tried not to feel the same. Why? Because I was terrified. Of me. Of losing you. I smiled sadly. You almost lost me anyway. I know. There was no anger in his voice, only regret. I reached for his hand. He hesitated. Then his fingers slowly closed around mine. It was such a small gesture, but after everything that had happened, it felt enormous. We stayed like that for a long time. No promises. No dramatic declarations. Just two people admitting that love could not survive without truth. The next morning, I returned to the estate with Dorian. Marcus was waiting near the main house. He looked exhausted. I stopped in front of him. You lied to me. Marcus nodded. I know. You made me doubt someone who never deserved it. I was afraid. So was Dorian. Marcus looked toward the gate. I never meant for things to go this far. That is what people say when they regret being caught. He looked at me. I am sorry. I believed that he was sorry. But forgiveness did not mean pretending nothing had happened. I forgive you, I said quietly. His eyes widened. But I don't trust you. He nodded. I understand. That was enough. I walked away. Dorian was waiting by the gate. The same yellow light hung above him. He looked at me. Are you staying? I smiled. For now. His shoulders relaxed. Our hands touched again. This time, neither of us moved away. The sun was beginning to rise behind the trees. And for the first time, the gate no longer felt like a place where secrets were hidden. It felt like a place where something honest could begin. The morning after everything changed, the estate felt strangely peaceful. Nothing outside looked different. The same trees moved slowly in the morning wind. The same birds called from somewhere beyond the roof. The dusty road still stretched toward the distant hills. But something inside me had changed. For the first time since arriving, I was not running from my feelings. I had spent years believing that needing someone was dangerous. Dorian had shown me something different. Sometimes, needing someone simply meant allowing yourself to be known. That was harder than it sounded. Trust did not return overnight. Neither did forgiveness. There were still moments when I remembered the secrets and felt that familiar ache in my chest. Dorian understood that. He never asked me to forget. He never told me that everything was suddenly perfect. Instead, he became patient. When I had questions, he answered them. When I became quiet, he did not pressure me. And when something frightened him, he finally told me instead of hiding it. Slowly, we learned a different way to be together. One evening, we sat outside the guardhouse as rain moved across the distant hills. Dorian handed me a cup of tea. You're thinking too much. I smiled. You always know. You get a certain look. What look? Like you're arguing with yourself. I laughed softly. Then I became serious. Do you ever regret meeting me? He looked surprised. No. Not even after everything? Especially after everything. I looked down at the cup in my hands. I used to think love was supposed to feel safe all the time. Dorian smiled gently. Maybe love isn't always safe. I looked at him. Weeks passed. My original plans changed. I had expected to return to America quickly, but I decided to stay longer. More importantly, there were parts of myself I had only just begun to understand. Dorian continued working at the gate, but something about him had changed too. He smiled more. He talked about the future. Sometimes he even spoke about leaving the estate someday. I never thought I'd want another life, he admitted one evening. What changed? He looked at me. You. I smiled. That sounds like a dangerous answer. It probably is. We both laughed quietly. It was not the laughter of people who had forgotten their pain. It was the laughter of people who had finally survived it. One evening, I asked Dorian about the photograph. He brought it from an old box. The picture showed him and Marcus years earlier. What do you feel when you look at it now? I asked. Dorian studied the faded image. Sadness. Anger. Less than before. Why? Because I don't want the worst thing someone did to me to become the most important part of my life. I understood. For years, I had done the same thing. I had allowed old disappointments to define how much I trusted people. Dorian folded the photograph and placed it back inside the box. I can't change what happened. No, I said. But I can decide what happens next. I smiled. That sounds like something I would say. He looked at me. Maybe you are rubbing off on me. The evening grew darker. The yellow light above the gate came on. I remembered the first night I had seen it. Back then, Dorian had been a stranger. Now he was the person I wanted beside me when the world became quiet. I stood beside him. Dorian. Yes. I don't want promises about forever. He looked at me carefully. Good. I laughed. Good. Forever is a long time. So what do you want? He thought for a moment. Honesty about tomorrow. My heart softened. That I can promise. He reached for my hand. I let him. We stood together beneath the warm light. There was no need for anything more. Our relationship had not begun with certainty. It had begun with friendship. Then came trust. Then fear. Then betrayal. And finally, honesty. That was enough. Months later, I returned to the same gate before sunrise. Dorian was already there. He was not sitting in the chair. He was standing outside the guardhouse, looking toward the road. When he saw me, his face brightened. I walked toward him. You're early, he said. So are you. I couldn't sleep. Why? He smiled. I was waiting. For what? He looked at me. For you. I stopped in front of him. The first light of morning appeared beyond the trees. For a moment, I thought about the person I had been when I arrived. Lonely. Suspicious. Afraid of becoming attached. I had believed that leaving would heal me. Instead, staying had forced me to face myself. Dorian had not magically fixed my life. He had simply reminded me that I was still capable of opening my heart. And perhaps that was what healing really meant. Not forgetting the wounds. Not pretending betrayal never happened. Not trusting everyone blindly. It meant learning that one person's dishonesty did not have to decide the rest of your life. Dorian squeezed my hand. Ready? I looked toward the road, then back at him. Yes. We walked away from the gate together. Behind us, the yellow light remained on. For so long, Dorian had stood there watching for danger. But that morning, he was not guarding against someone arriving. He was no longer waiting for someone to leave. He was simply walking beside someone who had chosen to stay. And as the sun rose over the trees, I finally understood the secret behind the African watchman. He had never really been guarding a gate. He had been guarding a heart that was terrified of being broken again. And somehow, without either of us planning it, we had learned how to open that gate together. If this story reminded you that trust can be rebuilt, even after betrayal, then stay with stories like this one. Because sometimes the person who enters your life quietly becomes the reason you finally believe that love can be gentle again.